All right. Welcome. Thank you very much for joining us here for what I think is an important webinar today. We are running our fortnightly series, and we have previously talked before about the programmatic transparency standards in one form or another in a couple of previous webinars. But in this one, we really do want to dive into the some of the details in terms of a reminder of what they look like, but also the new recently released supply chain validation tool that IAB Tech Lab have created and built for the industry to validate and maintain these critical supply chain standards within the new Transparency Center. So to talk us through this, I'm delighted to have a super stellar cast to help us through this. We have a representative industry panel of local experts, which includes Ben Murray from Interplay, Gemma Beeley from David Benjafield from MediaMath, and we are delighted to have Jill Wittkopp from IAB Tech Lab, who's the product lead on all things transparency, joining us today as well. So we're going to actually start by diving into this topic directly with Jill firstly, and then Ben, and a bit of interaction between both of them before we move on to the panel. Please do enter some questions into the Q&A tool. We'll endeavour to weave these into the panel session afterwards. And all the slides and video will be made available to you retrospectively early next week. Don't worry, so you don't have to take too many notes. But for now, I'll leave you in the capable hands of Jill to take us through the supply chain validation tool. Thanks, Jill.
Great. Thank you, JJ. So thank you for having me. I'm going to do a quick overview of what JJ just went through. So just at a high level, I'll talk a little bit about what it means to, when we say validating the supply chain, what those transparency standards are, just as a quick refresher for those who need it, and then an overview of what we built in the supply chain validation service. And so for those of you who aren't familiar with Tech Lab, IAB Tech Lab is a member organization, just like your local IAB, but we focus a little bit more on the technical standards. So we do engage with local IABs around the world to pull together that global member community to develop the technology standards that really enable trust and growth within the digital media ecosystem. And work on OpenRTB, the Open Measurement SDKs, Transparency Consent Framework with coordination with IAB Europe. And then the ones we'll talk about today, the supply chain transparency standards are things like Sellers.json, ads.txt, app-ads.txt. Hopefully some of those sound familiar, but I'll go through those in a little bit more detail. So as I said, the standards primarily that we're going to talk about today will focus mostly on ads.txt and app-ads.txt. Those are really ways for the publisher to list who's authorized to sell inventory for a given domain. And so the complementary standards to that are things like the supply chain object and Sellers.json. So the supply chain object is actually within the bid request, so within the actual transactions, and those are actually nodes that reveal each of the intermediaries. So everyone that's involved in the path to purchase, you could say, or the payment flow is the way that we generally say that, and it enables buyers to actually validate each intermediary and make sure that they're like within an ads.txt or app-ads.txt file, so to make sure that there is authorization there. And then Sellers.json is another public file like an ads.txt, but it is used to identify sort of the businesses operating. So, you know, in the world of advertising technology, there are, you know, business owners of a subset of domains. So you can actually see sort of that parent entity and understand those types of relationships about the business that's being paid for specific inventory. And also I throw a plug in here too for the sort of fourth quadrant is ads.cert. This is coming up. It's actually recently released and it's in public comment right now. And so that's actually a way to validate the the contents of the bid request to say like that. Actually, it's used in a couple different ways, but one of the ways that it can be used as far as securing the supply chain is to sort of secure attributes within a bid request to say, this is what these fields were supposed to be, so that the next party can check that those are still what they are when it gets to them, to make sure that nothing's been modified. And so just a couple quick examples, we'll see more of this later, but I think we're mostly familiar with the ads.txt authorized seller standard. So a listing again of the of those companies, advertising systems that are authorized to sell inventory on the domain, as well as the account ID through which that inventory is transacted, and then the nature of the relationship. And for Sellers.json, again, like I said, really providing information about the business identity, name and domain of the company that is being paid for a specific seller ID. And this just walks through, I mean, nothing about the ad tech supply chain is super simple. So this is a fairly simplified example of what this could look like as far as where the specifications are used within the transaction process. So if you think about this path from publisher to SSP to intermediary to DSP as a flow through the OpenRTB, like a programmatic transaction, then with each hop here, you would be adding in a supply chain object node to the bid request, and that is, each hop can be used to actually validate that that the authorized seller is in the ads.txt file, or that's the specific company is within a Sellers.json file, and then allows the DSP to, if they are running an aggregator, which is something we'll talk about as part of the Transparency Center, so they do some type of regular crawl of the ads.txt and Sellers.json files and sort of have that data in a data warehouse or in a database that they can actually reconcile and make sure that everyone that's in this transaction chain should be there and are authorized to be there. And so that sort of brings us to, those are the standards that help to sort of give us the lay of the land in the ecosystem and provide that transparency. But I also wanted to share just a little bit about why we thought that or why we decided to build the supply chain validation tool as part of the Tech Lab's Transparency Center. And so a lot of that you'll see a couple of industry publications here that sort of still, even years later, as recently as 2020, a couple of these are from 2020, and I know there's still news articles like this even more recently, where it's really calling into question or kind of articulating specific instances of ads.txt entries or Sellers.json entries that seem inconsistent with how the publisher thinks they're being represented, that there's still definitely confusion in some parts of the market and some participants that they're not sure the right labels to use between in ads.txt, there's the direct and reseller relationship, and then within Sellers.json, there's the intermediary, publisher, and both. And so those relationship declarations also can be important in sort of the way that buyers are choosing to purchase inventory to see like if they want the most direct path to purchase. And so with the news, some of the examples I'm showing here, sorry, I had one more. It's still really relevant to make sure that you know how to keep your file up to date if you're a publisher. So you know how to keep an ads.txt file up to date and sort of clean with entries that are actively being used. Same with Sellers.json files, that those participants in the ad tech ecosystem are keeping those up to date. And then also that buyers know what to look for. And what paths and what types of things they should be avoiding from a path perspective, or which types are fine. And those types of things kind of what led us to, sorry, more builds on here than I realized, the supply chain validation service. Because buying platforms really do, like most DSPs have a way to check the ads.txt file, make sure that a path that they're purchasing on, at least the final node, is validated through an authorized seller, that it is allowed to sell the inventory. But we really wanted to offer some options to help make that a little bit more clear in the industry of how there's more complexity there, and how we can help to provide some of that education in a simplified format. And we also realized from a publisher perspective that there's a lot of pressure on publishers and sellers to make sure they get those files right. Because if you have incorrect or missing entries, this sort of bullet here, it can be a big deal. You can end up missing revenue, or there can be opportunities for unauthorized sellers to actually present your inventory as theirs. So there are definitely still a lot of opportunities, I think, to add clarity here, and that's really what led us to the supply chain validation service. And so what we did is built a validator service that will actually, so we already had, as IAB Tech Lab, we had what's called an aggregator, and this is a service that actually crawls the web for ads.txt files, app-ads.txt files, and Sellers.json files, and then really just pulls all that data in. So it becomes a database of this domain, and these authorized sellers are who's allowed, in a way that's structured and formatted for platforms to really ingest and use in their own reconciliation systems. And what we did was, on top of that, instead of just having sort of the raw data available, we wanted to also make it so that it did a set of basic validation checks between the ads.txt file and the Sellers.json file. So we published about, I think there's just over 20 test cases that really look at a few things. First, looking at some basics of the ads.txt file, like, is it structurally correct? So going up through the specification and looking at things like, are there commas in the right places? If there's no authorized sellers, is the lack of ads.txt done correctly? If there are subdomains, are those issued correctly? And all of the different sort of technical attributes of the specification, we have a handful of checks that will just do that and flag to the publisher, like, these are correct, these are not correct. And these are things that could actually stop these authorized seller entries from being used by buying platforms. And then secondarily, those checks against the Sellers.json file. So not everything, as I kind of highlighted in the first couple slides, not everything between ads.txt and Sellers.json can be reconciled perfectly, because they are meant to do different things. Ads.txt, like I said, is to authorize sellers specifically for that domain. And a lot of Sellers.json is about providing information about the business entity being paid for the inventory. So it's not always a direct one-to-one match, especially in those parent-children relationships, but that doesn't mean that there's nothing we can check. We can check things and provide feedback to the publisher so that they are at least aware of what the business name is that's being paid for the inventory. And then they can actually check that themselves and make sure, like, yes, this is my parent company name, or no, I don't know who this company is, and that's problematic. We need to shut down that supply path as soon as we can. So those are the types of things that we actually are testing on behalf of the publisher. And then those that subscribe to the supply chain validation service get that feedback directly via an email notification, and get sort of customized alerts within the IAB Tech Lab tools portal that help them sort of work through what those next steps should be. And the way that we bucketed it, as I said, over 20 programmatic test cases that we're checking, and we bucketed the results into two big buckets, errors and alerts, because, as I said, not everything is just a yes or no. Some things are a little bit more gray and need some manual review. And so those that need manual review, we highlighted as alerts, and those that we can programmatically check and they're sort of a yes or no, we flag as errors if they're incorrect. And all of the test cases are sort of represented whether or not they're an error or an alert. And so with that, that's sort of the overview of how we got here and what the actual product does. And I would like to turn it over to Ben, because he has been using the product, and really, who better to sort of tell us about what they've learned.
Thank you, Jill. I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully everyone can see that. This is, my name is Ben Murray. I'm I'm here representing Interplay Media. Actually, what's quite good about us in validating this tool is that we have owned and operated media that we represent, as well as partners that we actually represent. So obviously, as you can imagine, managing ads.txt files on your owned and operated sites, is fairly straightforward, but working with partners, that in itself can actually represent challenges. We've been an early adopter of ads.txt back in 2017. This is an example of one of our ads.txt files on our Zero Digital platforms that I've actually used. And to be perfectly transparent with you, we implemented this in 2017. And if I'm honest, until the IAB approached me about actually, testing out this tool and actually reviewing ads.txt files more regularly, we've just basically, as I dare say, many people in ops on this call have actually, just tended to upload their ads.txt file and keep adding to it. If I'm perfectly honest, I've not actually been looking at how or taking the time to actually look and validate the tech partners that we're working with, because as you can see in this example here, we work with Outbrain, and they in turn work with multiple SSPs. Just how many of those guys are actually validated? And so what that actually led us to do was actually just take a look and properly review what our ads.txt files actually look like. So I have to say I've actually taken taken this example to clean up our current ads.txt files. This is what they look like now. That's not to say that there are still some issues, but actually it's much clearer and more concise for buyers to actually find what they're actually looking for. And just to give you some context before I dive into the actual tool and how valuable the tool has been, in 2019, we were working with a new partner, and they had previously had an ads.txt file attributed to them. So when we brought them on board and basically went through the process of actually integrating our ad tech stack with them, we basically layered our ads.txt file below their pre-existing ads.txt file, as an example. And we did all the checks and balances to ensure all the pipelines were working, cross-referencing, whitelisted domains, all this sort of stuff. We even actually checked the ads.txt file was okay. And what happened was we actually pushed that publisher live and realized that there was no supply of AdX coming through in this particular instance. And after 24 to 48 hours worth of troubleshooting, we were a little perplexed as to what was causing it. And what was causing it was the pre-existing ads.txt file that the publisher had with the old partnership actually was listed above our existing AdX supply. And what was happening was it was blocking it. But there was no way to tell how that was actually happening from just a static file. The IAB tool that I'm going to just briefly take you through would have actually spotted that immediately, and it could have saved us 24 to 48 hours worth of troubleshooting. So let's have a look at the tool. It's very, very simple. The IAB Tech Lab have a number of tools. We're going to concentrate on the supply chain validation, and it obviously is ads.txt and app-ads.txt validation. It's very, very simple to set up. As you can see there, I'm sure Jill and Jonas will actually give you some more information on actually the costs of the domains, but just follow the prompts in registering the domains. It's really, really straightforward. Click the plus button, simply add your domain, submit, and away you go. Let's take you into the actual file itself. And once you've actually listed your domain, what will happen is the tool will actually crawl your ads.txt file, and it's fairly consistently updated. Literally, we reviewed our setup on Tuesday as an example, and it's actually recently updated the actual file. But I'm going to give you a couple of use case examples from our zero tackle setup. And what's actually great about this tool is it pulls in not only the ads.txt file in one place, but the Sellers.json relationship in one place. Now, as always, when we reviewed this on Tuesday, I was getting more information through on the Sellers.json relationship. So for example, if you actually look here, you'll notice that we have The advertising system's Rubicon. So in here, you'd have the actual Sellers.json pulled in. But obviously, it also actually is flagging, it'll flag any notification errors that may be coming through. And I'm going to take you to an example that we earmarked, and you'll have to take my word for it. This is a partner that we work with. As I mentioned, we work with a number of tech partners that have multiple SSP ads.txt files attributed to them. So in this instance, for Outbrain, for example, we're working with Rhythm One. Now, Rhythm One, this account here was being flagged literally a couple of days ago for saying it had a duplicate entry within the Sellers.json file. Now, I would never, ever in a million years have been able to actually detect that without that tool. So if I take a look at the account, the seller ID, and go into the Rhythm One Sellers.json file, you'll notice there that I am getting 2 entries, which is causing obviously an issue and being flagged. There should only be 1 entry, and it's potentially this one, Infolinks Media LLC, not this one. So what that means is I can actually then go to Infolinks and say, hey, we have a duplicate Sellers.json file within, for this actual tech partner. Can you actually update your files at your end, just to sort of clean the paths? And then again, if I go further, we were working obviously with a partner, AOL.com, and that was being flagged to say, hey, you don't have an existing relationship with this client. So again, I was able to actually go into the AOL Sellers.json file, which is here. And immediately you can see that there is no entry for Interplay Media, which means that I can actually go in and remove the basically the ads.txt file that's no longer being in use, essentially. I mean, to conclude, we're looking to roll this tool out for a lot of our premium partners. We're actually keen to sort of report back on how the tool has helped improve our supply and improve potential revenue since its adoption. And what I think would be quite cool to do is perhaps at the next AdOps event, hoping it's about 3 or 4 months away, it might be good for me to sort of report back on what we've seen as an improvement because of the tools that we've adopted for our owned and operated and premium partners.
Great, and I can jump right back for a final slide. And one of the things, so I'll share that, especially the example that Ben gave regarding the duplicate entries in a Sellers.json file. Now, thankfully, the one that he found was quite benign. It was the same company for both entries, and honestly looked like just a duplication because one of the entries was an LLC and one just kind of had the company name. Understandable, but should, it'd be good to get corrected. Some of the things that we've seen reported on those types of use cases and why we added that test case was honestly some of those the sort of dark pool examples that we've seen in some of the news are where the same ID is given to multiple entries within a Sellers.json file, and the publisher only knows about theirs. So that's one of the cases that we're looking for there. Like that was not an example of it, but it is also like a good check to know that those test cases are being done, so that if that were happening, that it would be flagged within the tool. And in this case, it provided a good sort of hygiene check. And so the few key takeaways I have, some of these will sound a little repetitive, but I think that they're important. So these are sort of the asks, I would say, of the industry. So if you are an owner of an ads.txt, app-ads.txt Sellers.json file, the ask is to make sure that you have a way to update it regularly. I know that companies don't folks working at these companies don't have all the time in the world, and it is something that takes time to maintain, like with removing out of use entries, or I think folks are normally pretty good about adding the new ones. But updating entries and entities as names change, which happens kind of frequently in the ad tech ecosystem. Those things are important to make sure that sort of only the authorized supply paths that you think should be transacting are in fact transacting. If you're a publisher and want help with that process, that's where you can sign up for the Tech Lab's supply chain validation tool. So that is and can be done through the UI that Ben highlighted. So it is a pretty easy self-checkout, as he articulated. I do have a coupon that's, I think, available for a little while longer that I will make sure JJ has. I don't have it off the top of my head here. And then the last two there are, if a seller wants to, review their publisher partners file. So if you are an SSP or an exchange or someone that works with a lot of publishers, you can actually subscribe to the Tech Lab's Transparency Center APIs. It's not as nice and easy as the supply chain validation UI, but it is the bulk set of data that shows all of the aggregator entries for ad set text. And you could actually comb through that data set to find all of your entries and check those to make sure that you're listed in publisher files the way that you expect to be. And then the final one is if you're a buyer and want to understand the Tech Lab notification codes, we've made all of those publicly available. So you can actually see each of the test cases that we're running and what the expected outcome of each of those test cases is, so that you can actually think about that in relation to sort of your risk tolerance as a buyer and which types of supply paths you would want to purchase on and which ones you may want to stay away from. I think that's it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And yes, we will have, and we do have, a specific discount code for our members provided by Jill and the rest of the Tech Lab team. So we'll be, get in touch with us on that, and we'll be sharing all the links with you along with the slides from today and the video. So if I bring in the rest of the panel, it's fantastic to hear there, Ben, that you got your hands dirty with the tool, you're seeing value in it, and you're going to start utilizing it in your sort of day-to-day operations more.
Correct.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a thing that's been, that's often missed, with, and I dare say, like big ops teams, even more so than ourselves, what happens when someone leaves, what happens where, if someone's looking after a specific partner that has multiple entries within that actual tech stack. There's no way to sort of cross-reference that from a static file. Yeah. This tool allows you at an instant glance. That example that I gave you was an actual live example of a ads.txt blocking AdX from an entry that was basically defunct, and it took us 24 to 48 hours to detect. This tool would have told me in 5 seconds.
That enables a two-way communication between you and your selling partners, rather than just kind of updating the ads.txt file and crossing your fingers. Were there any aspects of the tool, but Jill on the spot here there a little bit, Ben, that you felt have been a little bit easier? Any recommendations for what you'd like to see as a publisher? Yeah,
look, one feature I think would be really good is to provide a quick link to the Sellers.json file itself. Because obviously it's still a bit of a manual process. The Rhythm 1 example, I had to sort of go out and find Rhythm 1's. I mean, that was an easy one. Rhythm 1's Sellers.json file, quite easy to detect. If you go to, say, someone like Magnite, their Sellers.json files are actually under the domain of Rubicon. So if there was a way for us to be able to actually scrape the actual Sellers.json domain that we could link to directly on basically the offending is probably a harsh word, but on the sort of rogue entry that we can actually quickly just tap a link, go through, that'd be terrific. Another item that would be quite good, and I'm probably pushing it here, but I recall seeing this tool within Google Ad Manager EMEA for a client that we represented, and I thought, oh, this is quite cool. There's a validation tool by IAB Tech Lab. If anyone who actually dives into the ads.txt files within their ad server, they'll probably notice that there'll be 1 or 2 errors that are put in. But this tool is way more comprehensive at identifying what the actual key issues are. It'd be quite nice to see if the ad servers would collaborate with IAB Tech Lab to integrate this tool directly into the different ad servers that are out there.
Yeah, there you go. There's a fantasy state for you, Jill.
There's I definitely agree. There is and have enjoyed getting Ben's feedback on this because there are definitely some UI enhancements that I think can make the goal of the tool is to make the publisher's life as easy as possible, and some of those things are really easy wins. Some, like the AdX integration, maybe a little bit less easy win, but a good kind of thought about where something like this could go, how far sort of the data could be used.
Yeah,
and like, sorry, and another one would be buy side. It'd be great to see what this tool could look like for people in that space who need to validate the supply paths. We talked about the fact that it was actually within, the checks and balances come within the DSP, but it'd be really cool if, like, marketers or buyers at the trade desk level would be able to actually ensure that the plans that they'd put forward, have valid supply paths.
Well, we'll bring you into that, actually, David. It's still not call you David, normally call you Benji. But look, I mean, in terms of utilization of the supply chain object to be able to retrospectively reconcile and report on the supply path activities, is that, how much of that are you actually seeing in this market currently?
Yeah, quite a lot of interest, excitement, enthusiasm. I think usage probably falls into two broad categories. So clients and users of our platform that love data, that want to get into particularly granular, insightful pieces to eat every dial and change every lever they possibly can to maximize what they know about their advertiser and how they're delivering value for that media dollar. We also have clients, though, that I think we've mentioned time poor once, and I think it will be, it's a recurring theme constantly across our industry, that just want us to handle this complexity for them. They would much rather we use all of the machine learning tools that we have, that they treat this as like a hygiene moment more than strictly something that they want to make active decisioning on. Those that are getting into the data, those that are using it, I'm surprised at how much value we see in reseller type players. I think for a while there was a long kind of belief that direct was always going to be best. I think from our perspective, reselling's fine as long as you're adding incremental value over a direct pathway. And if that incremental value is returning back value for that investment, great, use the reseller. That's absolutely an appropriate use of that investment because it is returning incremental value.
Yeah, I mean, we do actually, so this before Christmas, so the next couple of months, we're going to run a bit of a check-in with all the DSPs and sort of programmatic heads of the agencies in terms of the amount of usage and any feedback on specifically these standards. So that will be interesting. And all the tools that we can provide for supply chain transparency and for SPO. So for you, Gemma, I mean, how important are having tools such as this or just aligning to the philosophy of transparency in your day-to-day activities for your clients?
Yeah, I mean, transparency's always been a really hot topic, and I think it's going to remain critical in our industry. And we're seeing that more and more when we see things like the ACCC Digital Advertising Services Inquiry come out, ISPA reports, and so that's really shifted the focus from probably where we were a few years ago, from buying transparency. We've talked a lot of recent and will continue around sort of content and regulation. And now we're really looking at supply. And as I said, we've seen that come through in a lot of the recent reports. It's super important to our clients. And I think that stat is the report about the unknown delta averaging 15%. What I find most interesting about that is when you look into the data, that it ranges from 0 to 86%. So that means that whilst the average doesn't seem that high, you've got some clients who are just absolutely nailing this, and there are others who really need to have a much more stringent focus on their programmatic setup and making sure that they're being managed for success. So that area, to me, is something that is really important to look at for clients and agencies. And all agencies will be in different stages of their journey. So I can't, in terms of like the importance of it and what we're doing at IPG, really comfortable to talk around that. And actually, there was a big press release last week, so hopefully that's been read. But we've been focused on this for the past couple of years. So there's actually been a really huge focus from Matterkind, who are our addressable programmatic experts. They completed earlier this year a really extensive review and market of the 11 major SSPs. It covered about 31 categories, and it indexed each SSP against those categories, which then sort of resulted in a tiered structure of preferred SSPs with sort of clear hero and use case benefits of each. And that's allowed two things for us and our clients. The first one is that it's allowed log level data to be passed back, which provides like management of really transparent supply paths. And that was described to me really, I think, really usefully to think of as someone that isn't from a tech background, as like a food nutritional label, so you can see exactly what's in there and what fees are accounted for what part and how that comes together to make a whole. And the second thing it's allowed is a direct connection with DSPs, which has allowed us to transact overall on a lower take rate. And that's really beneficial for us because it's essentially direct savings of non-working media that we can then reinvest into working media, which means that when there's more money in working media, the client's performance goes up, which means that publishers then also get more investment into that, so they increase their yield. And for our SSP partners, it means that they see overall performance usually means increased investment into that channel. So it's a win-win situation. And I think in the press release, there was like announcements around some of the other really strong results, like 55% reduction in effective CPM and average reduction rates of non-working media of up to 5%. So I think that what that demonstrates is that when partners come together to work together for a better and more transparent ecosystem, it's not just the buy side that wins, but also the sell side. And I think that's really important to bear in mind.
No, that's fantastic. And it's to see that level of diligence and effort and rolling your sleeves up in programmatic. It's funny, isn't it? In automation, it's like you just turn it on and leave it. It's actually quite the opposite. As mentioned by you, Ben, and do you have any other recommendations for publishers in terms of the setup? And we actually have a question as well in terms of, because you are an example of those that have your own unoperated media, your own domains, and those that you represent. You don't have to have a Sellers.json file in that case. You simply explicitly declare it, whether it's direct or reseller. Is that's right? Yeah.
Pretty much. Look, I mean, for most ad ops teams out there, everyone and for everyone in general, really, they have poor bandwidth, right? This is not a priority for a lot of teams. And I mean, I'll leave that for the actual people on this call to actually answer for themselves. But look, as I said, I'm recommending to our premium partners who we represent to actually be part of the supply chain validation. As Gemma just said, they're looking to work with people who have got these clear supply paths. So the more transparent you can be, the better it is for not only our owned and operated media, but also the partners that we have been tasked or brought on board with to maximize their inventory and to ensure we're actually returning them the best value that we possibly can. As I mentioned, obviously in the demonstration that I did, back in 2019, before we had any validation tools, a very simple error, a very simple implementation error of putting a existing ads.txt file above a ceased ads.txt file was actually causing a blockage. Now that as I took you all through the demo, that would have been picked up instantly, and it could have saved us 48 hours. I don't know about you, but 48 hours worth of time saved is thousands of dollars, right? So look, if you're part of a big team or an ever-changing team, or if you inherit new tech partners or clients, or you're deploying partners who use multiple tech supply side platforms or other partners within the validation tool, you can not only streamline the operation, it can also help identify any weak links, any issues that that this partner is actually not transacting, ultimately help you clear the pipes and maintain a healthy revenue flow for your validated partners.
Great, thank you. And actually, Jill, I'll bring you in to answer that question if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. So there was a question about if the sales houses that represent multiple publishers, both O&O and not, should create their own Sellers.json files. And I'm actually going to course correct a little bit on that, because we do ask that those, so that you do have a Sellers.json file. You don't need to have entries for the O&O, because what the Sellers.json file is supposed to do is it actually represents each of the business entities from which the sales house gets supply. And so like you don't get supply, from like the O&O is, you're not getting that from anywhere, you're getting it from yourself. So you have the app-ads.txt files for that. But those that you don't own, we do ask the spec requests the Sellers.json file. And I can drop a link. There's an implementation guide from Tech Lab for the Sellers.json, and they actually walks through 3 specific examples for sales houses, because again, it is nuanced about the nature of the sales house and ownership of the properties.
Okay, good to know. Thank you for clarifying that. So my initial answer was incorrect. So we'll provide that implementation guide with the collateral, something for everyone to think about there. Oh, thank you. There you go. Quick work. Gemma, back to you, just in terms of the flow of money and with these types of industry supportive initiatives, the approach that IPG, Masterkind are taking, can we ultimately expect to see those publishers and vendors that aren't up to date and aren't reconciling accurately and keeping these files up to date, not keeping the best or latest standards and best practices, they're just ultimately going to see less spend, right?
Yes, I think that if the question is, will we see spend drop for publishers, platforms who don't transact in a transparent way, then the answer is absolutely. We've definitely already seen that in the work that we've done with our IPG SSP audit, because the partners that came to the table with a really transparent approach are the ones, and also I should say who best met our clients' needs, are the ones who are selected for the initial stage when we talk about that tiered review. I think transparency, trust in our ecosystem is key to ensure that we have ongoing investment in the digital space, particularly in programmatic. And this investment is needed in order to fund new technology and also to continue to fund great content. So it benefits us as advertisers, but it also benefits us as consumers, and it also benefits our clients' brands. So I think it's mutually beneficial for everyone to continue to look at initiatives that support transparency.
Yeah, I mean, this is the never-ending case for bodies such as ourselves and IAB Tech Lab, where standards are voluntary and mandatory. When it's working well, organically, the benefit is seen by everyone. With the adoption, and it becomes almost mandatory because it becomes part of the most efficient and effective way of working operationally. Now, I know there's a separate project run by MediaMath, which is philosophically aligned, called Source, which you've been running now for about 18 months. David, is that something you can talk us through in terms of success and uptake, and even some of the similarities in approach, or are certain files such as app-ads.txt leveraged in this project?
Yeah, for sure. So we talk about Source as being addressable, aligned, and accountable media buying. We won't go further into product. This is an IAB, not a MediaMath product session. But those values are really aligned in terms of like what we're trying to do with the industry. To the point now where we're only transacting through pipes that support this kind of philosophy. And we recognize that we're in an evolving ecosystem. So we recognize that not everything is going to be perfect tomorrow. So we provide sort of shades of gray for our partners to be able to work through, but clearly highlight to our clients and engagement with our clients on exactly who is transparent, how, and what they can do to transact in the most transparent way possible. And that's definitely the value that we've seen. I think as we kind of run through this and talk about this with our clients once or twice, there's kind of an audible penny drop moment. And there's the kind of thing of why should we do it any other way? This is an incredibly straightforward, obvious kind of sense that transparency should be talked about like we talk about viewability. Like it should be a hygiene metric that is critical to the success of our business. That being said, right now we need to give it the attention and the energy and the focus to bring it to a point where that transparency is mature and clear and accessible for everyone in the ecosystem.
Nicely put. So Jill, in terms of the center itself, we've got the supply chain validation tool rolling out as a part of that. What else can we expect to see in the short to medium term and even in the longer term in terms of tools for the industry they're in?
Yeah, what the Transparency Center really aims to do is pull together metadata about the participants of the digital advertising ecosystem. And so I'd say that the next sort of bucket of things that we can expect through early next year are more data sets. And so what those would look like, Tech Lab, all of the data sets that we're providing, or sort of the tools that we build, are in service of a specification. And so you will have seen, or you may have seen, that we released a couple of specifications that sound a little bit similar to the ones we discussed today. So for Sellers.json, you may have heard of buyers.json, and so that's again a file that would provide sort of similar types of attribute of information about the businesses that are buying. And so the data that are in those files, as that starts to get adopted, I think we could expect to see in the Transparency Center. And what we say when we say that data is available in the Transparency Center, what we're doing is making it available in a few ways. So one is just searchable, so that you, like each of us as like humans, as individuals, can actually go into the Transparency Center and do like quick searches in an easy to use UI, as opposed to having to go through sort of and find each of the public files and then sort of search through them. Again, it's all possible, like what Ben was doing as he showed us the examples of how he was spot checking things that he learned from the tool. But the Transparency Center UI is, again, trying to pull some of that stuff into one place for ease, and sort of put it all in one place to make it easy. So I think about things like buyers.json, and there's another specification that really I actually think we just released for public comment last week. idsources.json is another one that you can likely expect to see in some form as that finalizes. And those are I would say data sets, and enriching those data sets is sort of the focus for next year.
Fantastic. Yeah, I shared the link on the buy-side standards. I mean, we will be doing more of a push on that probably early next year, I think, depending upon everyone's bandwidth and the ID sources, transparency in identifiers and who's utilizing what is, that's a great project. And we'll be running a webinar in late November, actually, on that very topic. And in fact, on the buy-side standards, are you seeing much traction as yet? Or is it's still being digested by the industry, is it? So this is the reciprocal arrangement on the buy side as we currently see on the sell side in terms of declarations and the paths through the demand chain into exchanges.
Yeah, so I would say that we're still seeing a lot of folks sort of digesting, and I think especially those that may not have actually participated in the working group, figuring out like where it applies to them. Because when you think of buyers, you think my first inclination is always the brands, agencies, and those folks that are placing that are actually have media to advertise. But really, buyers.json applies to a lot more participants than that, because it's really anyone that buys a piece of media along the chain. So you can actually think, with the complexity of the ad tech ecosystem, there are even some folks that would have a sellers.json and a buyers.json. Like, I mean, that yes. they're easily doing both. Yep. And then, but also bringing in new participants, obviously, on the buy side too. So I think there's a little bit of digestion still going on. We're getting more inquiries, I would say, to see how this applies to folks, but I don't think we've seen much like posting of files yet, or some sort of transaction layer at this point.
Okay, well, we'll look out for that. And as mentioned, we'll be focusing on it a little more in probably in early 22, and looking forward to a rollout of more and more tools as we work together here. And as Gemma mentioned, the ACCC There's some work to be done collaboratively by all of us there to respond to that. So look, as for today, I don't see any more questions, but thank you so much, everyone, for all your time. We'll share the collateral of today as promised with everyone here. Now, next week, we do have our Measure Up week, where we have a number of different presentations every morning on the subject of, obviously, in and around research and ad effectiveness and measurement, and split into 4 different topics and 4 different days, with the awards happening on Thursday afternoon, early evening. So we look forward to that. And I think you've got the link shared there with you now. And thanks again to the panelists. Thanks for your time. Thanks for your input and insights. Thanks for everyone for attending. And I hope you have a lovely afternoon. And you have a lovely evening, Jill.